Hi, everyone. Thank you for tuning into today's webinar. During this session, our speaker help make executives more knowledgeable about domain spoofing. We have with us Josh Cook, who's a partner at Prince LaBelle, who focuses his practice on privacy and security, and David Williams, who is co-founder and CEO of AtomCell. So I will kick it over to Josh to start us off.
Great. Thanks, Kaylee. So we'll jump right in here. What is domain spoofing? And so it sounds a little silly, but it can be a very serious problem for your organization. And really what it is an impersonation attack against a particular company. The threat actor in this instance is trying to deceive the recipient of an email into thinking that email is legitimate, or deceive a visitor to a website into thinking that that website is legitimate. And just by way of example, princelabel.com is our firm's website. That's the legitimate website. If you add dash support to that, it still has Prince Labelle in that name, but it is not the legitimate website. And that Prince Labelle dash support I just made up for this purpose, but it demonstrates that when you change that name at all before the top level domain, but before the .com, it behind the scenes redirects you to a completely different part of the internet. So a completely different site owned by a different host, run by a different owner. So princelobel.com on that second bullet point there, the O in there, I actually changed that to be the O from the Cyrillic alphabet instead of a normal English O. That again changes the entire domain and behind the scenes will direct you to a completely different part of the internet. I did that here to demonstrate that your eyeballs aren't always going to be able to clue you in on what is a spoof domain and what is a legitimate domain. And that's one of the things I really love about David's team and what they do is they can help you identify those things that you just can't trust your eyeballs to do. So why why does this matter? Why are we worrying about spoof domains? First and foremost, because it will have a direct business impact on your organization. Now, a lot of times that business impact takes the form of a financial loss. It's a spoofed email coming in directing that you change bank information or asking you to pay a fake invoice, for example. Those things are obvious financial losses, but what we're really talking about here is the reputational harm that your company will suffer. The threat actor is trying to leverage the trust that your brand has developed in the marketplace, and they're trying to leverage that to commit fraud. It might be fraud on you, it might be fraud on somebody else, but really what they're doing is trying to leverage the trust you've developed in your brand to commit a crime. And so that results in a loss of trust in your brand. And what you're really doing here is trying to protect that trust because that trust is the foundation that all of your sales are based on. It's really the foundation of all of your interactions with your customers, with your vendors, with the public at large. So that's what they're trying to harm here, and that's what you're trying to protect. So now I'm going to turn it over to David to walk us through some of the technical aspects of domain spoofing.
Josh, thanks for setting the table here on this important topic. There are a variety of ways that organizations become susceptible to domain spoofing. One of the things you've already touched on, Josh, is the lookalike domain. So an attacker is trying to make their malicious domain look identical to yours, and that can be done by the similar characters. There's another way of doing it, which is called typo squatting, which is kind of what it sounds like, which is some malicious character will register lots of domains, sometimes dozens, that have sort of near miss variants. If you've got a name that's hard to spell or just a little bit long, they may change an L and an O or put two L's where there's one and just wait for people to slip up and you end up on their site. A major thing that we see these days is through email. And one thing to know is that email protocols are actually insecure by design because when these protocols were developed, it was before anybody thought about phishing. So thankfully, there are some authentication controls. You'll see ones like SPF, DKIM, and DMARC. And this is a way to protect your domain from being spoofed. Now, it's not actually that easy to set them up properly, and though a lot of organizations have set up SPF and DKIM and DMARC, they don't always have them configured completely properly. And even when they do, the world changes and the attackers are actually innovating. So what was safe 2 or 3 years ago is no longer safe, and you have to tighten up your settings. Sometimes the controls are loosened even to make it easier to integrate with other valuable services that you might use, like CRMs. So this is actually a job for specialists to fix. If you combine the weak email controls with an unmonitored or lookalike domains, you really have the perfect attack surface. And that's what a lot of the attackers are able to leverage. Let's talk about how an attack actually can unfold on the next page. So here's what an attacker might do. And most of the attacks follow this pattern. The attacker is going to identify a weak link, typically an SPF or DMARC that's not set up properly, or some domain variant that you never had registered. And then they're going to send a spoofed email. And it's almost always something urgent, an invoice that you have to pay, DocuSign that it's time for you to sign this contract that you've been waiting for, or a password reset that needs to be done right away. Once someone clicks on that, the victim is going to then land on a fake login page and their credentials will be harvested. So you'll type in your email address and the password, but rather than logging into the legitimate site, you've actually just handed over your credentials to a malicious actor. And then that attacker is going to use those same credentials and log into everything you have access to. And these days, that's cloud systems, your financial accounts, your shared drives, wherever you have the permissions. And once they're inside, they're going to escalate quickly and things get out of control from there. As I mentioned, this is actually quite common. We did some research on about 3,000 companies spread across 150 mid-market private equity portfolios. And we see that actually most are vulnerable. This was done a year ago. 55% of domains were spoofable. We repeated the analysis 6 months later, and it was unchanged. It actually got slightly worse. And it turned out that some of the domains that were okay the first time around actually were broken later. So this is actually moving target, because when there are adjustments made in your environment, this can also result in losing the protection. So you have to check it out. The first time we did this analysis, there wasn't a single PE firm who had their entire portfolio protected. And that even included private equity firms that invest only in cybersecurity companies. So this is really quite widespread. The second time around, there was one company that was perfect, one private equity firm, which happened to be our client. So it is doable, but it needs a concerted effort and sustained attention.
Thanks, David. What I find really fascinating, you mentioned, the human risk and the human involvement, and it's kind of axiomatic at this point that the bad guys aren't hacking into any systems; they're just logging in. They're just taking the credentials and walking right in the door, and it is something that every organization can learn from and can make better. Um, you know where do lawyers add value here? And I just want to touch on this because, I was in-house at a Fortune Global 500 for many years, and that was something that we always had to think about, right? Do the lawyers need to be involved in this process? Where can the lawyers, effectively use their time here? And there's a few places where lawyers can be critical to a domain spoofing defense. One is, if you've done this a few times, you get really good really quickly at understanding, what is important, how to make decisions quickly, what do you need to do, how do you preserve the evidence, taking screenshots of a site or evidence of domain registration, so it's that kind of stuff where lawyers can really shine. But importantly, we also can kind of wrap the entire process under privilege. So whether it's attorney-client privilege or the attorney work product doctrine, you want to be able to have your lawyers involved in this process to help, for a down the road issue, maybe you end up getting sued, or maybe there's a regulatory inquiry. You want to be able to protect yourself in that respect as well. But so the lawyers can be involved in the takedown and UDRP process, and we'll talk about that in a minute. And vendors can do that as well. There are IT vendors out there that can help with that stuff, but they will be the first to tell you they're not lawyers. They're not doing anything underprivileged. They're not acting as lawyers. So you really want your lawyers to be involved in that process throughout anyway. And then, with the communications and third-party coordination, the lawyers can really be a big value add there as well.
Well, Josh, I want to actually emphasize that element of it because when we're talking about third parties, we're talking about you've got hosting providers, you've got security vendors, and sometimes law enforcement. And frankly, having management going and reaching out to the FBI is not necessarily something you want to see. You want someone who's done that, who has the relationships, knows what conversations to have. I really wanted to underline that point.
Oh, that's an excellent call, David. Thank you. So the process here is compressed, and it's compressed because you're really trying to protect your brand. So time is of the essence here. So in the first 48, first 44, 24, first 24 hours, you're collecting evidence, you're engaging counsel, you're thinking through how can we stop this, whatever this actually is, how do we stop it? And then within the first 3 days, you are initiating a takedown of the site, and we'll walk through that in the next slide. And then within the first week or two, you want to initiate a UDRP, and we'll explain exactly what that means as well. And then counsel will be involved in ongoing monitoring of the whole process. So everything that you're doing, you want your lawyers to be involved in making sure that things are proceeding the way they're supposed to proceed, that there's some follow up, that nothing falls off the radar, so to speak. So when we're talking about a takedown, that's essentially a cease and desist letter that you send to the host or the registrar. Now, it's really best in those active abuse situations. So if there's evidence of a phishing kit on a site, or malware is being deployed, or the domain is clearly an effort at impersonation, those are the kinds of evidence pieces that you want to support your takedown demand. You really need that malicious intent or the malicious content in the site. It's not enough to just say, well, this domain is really similar to ours. That alone doesn't really cut it. You need some evidence that there's some bad acts going on behind the scenes. And you'll get a result usually within days, sometimes even within hours. It's not a free process because you need support. You need folks to help you do this, but there's no filing fee involved. You're really just sending a letter to the host or the registrar for the domain. Now, so the upshot is that it can be really, really fast. You can get a response really quickly. The downside is that it can be challenged. It can be reversed. You're really subject to the judgment of the host or the registrar. So if you challenge a domain, challenge a site, they may take it down immediately. The site owner may come back to them and say, no, no, this is legit. This is my site. I had a client that, they really wanted this site taken down. It was the client used a short acronym, and the site they wanted taken down was actually the initials of the owner of the site. So it was his initials of his name. They took the site down and then they put it back up because it was not a fraudulent use. It was a legitimate use of the site. So that's some of the risk of going this route. It can lead to a really quick resolution, but you're really subject to the judgment of the host or the registrar. For the UDRP process, the internet loves acronyms. It's a Uniform Domain Name Dispute Resolution Policy. It is a program operated through ICANN, the Internet Corporation for the Assignment of Names and Numbers. And you typically file, it's basically an arbitration, sometimes with the World Intellectual Property Organization, WIPO, but you can file it with a number of different forms. But what you're really seeking there is an intellectual property infringement solution. You're saying that your trademark is being infringed, and so you need to establish that you have a trademark in this name, and that there is some infringement action going on. Now, if it's fraud, if it's a threat actor that has registered the domain, they're not going to fight it. They're just going to, they're going to ignore the whole process, frankly, and they're just going to move on and attack somebody else, or maybe they'll attack you in a different way, but they're not going to fight it. And so you'll get a result from through this UDRP process in 30 to 60 days, typically. And the result is that you're going to own the domains that were registered fraudulently. Now, there's a filing fee. It can be up to $5,000 per UDRP. You can combine a bunch of domains within one UDRP as long as they were registered, around the same time. But that's really it's a good process. It's a not fast, but certainly not a slow process. And the upshot is at the end, you will own those domains, but then you have to decide what are you going to do with them, and that's the next issue. So when do you escalate these issues? First and foremost, I want to focus on the customer harm and the data exposure piece here. For customer harm, you're really trying to prevent a bad customer experience. When a customer is thinking they're going to your site, even if they're going to a fraudulent site, they still have you in mind. And so it's your brand that's being harmed, and it's their experience with your brand that is causing that bad reaction. So that's really what you want to avoid, is that negative association that the customers will have with your brand. And it's really just an association that comes up because the only thing you did was not intervene fast enough to address this issue. So it really is, time is of the essence. When you see something, you've got to take action quickly. On the data exposure piece, whether we're talking about customer data, employee data, or even corporate internal information, you know, it's really important to control that, to understand what you have, to keep a handle on it. And if there is any risk of exposure of any of that, you want to take action as quickly as possible. Even the corporate internal data, sometimes companies feel like, it's just our internal org chart. It's not a big deal. But in reality, it is a big deal, because the threat actors, they will try to social engineer their way into your organization. And you might think that, okay, so they know that, Sue reports to Bob, not a big deal. But what they're really trying to do is understand the reporting structure so that they can exploit that at a later date. And so, that information can be just as critical to you and to your defense of your organization as, the customer information or the employee information that might be exposed. So,
Josh, before you move on, I
yeah.
just wanted to mention, I wanted to underscore the importance sometimes of the timing. You mentioned, when it's urgent and move quickly. These are not matters that can wait for 30, 60, 90 days. The threat actors are often still active in the system at the time that you're doing these escalations. This isn't like you were in a car crash and now you can report it, in the next week or two. It could be, someone that's continuing to be there and to cause trouble. And so once the escalation starts, you do want to move expeditiously and get the legal help that you need and the technical help in order to make sure that these guys are actually out of the system as you're doing this. So this is not the sort of thing to wait on.
Absolutely right. It's an excellent point, David. And one of the things that you don't want to wait on is communication. You really want to move quickly if you think that there's a spoofing situation that you're facing. You really want to move quickly to get in front of any recipients of potentially fraudulent messages. Make sure they understand that they need to be on the lookout for this stuff. You want to talk to anyone that you may be paying money to, or anyone who may be paying money to you. You want to make sure that payee information is verified, and you're verifying it out of channel. So, if you get the instruction by email, you're picking up the phone and calling them to confirm it through a different means. And then, depending on what the situation is, you may end up facing media inquiries. And so you really want to be ready for those. You don't want to be caught off guard. You want to make sure that you have, a media holding statement in place and you understand how media inquiries should be directed internally. So you don't want someone from a call center talking to a reporter. You want them to understand, this is how we route these kinds of calls and what we need to do with those.
Josh, there's often an error that companies make, and you and I have actually seen this and worked on this together, where they may want to say something different internally to their employees versus what they're saying externally. Now, in today's world, first of all, these things are very, mixed. You've got your employees that may be on social media in the same places where the reporters are. It's very important to have a consistent message and to realize that, you can't just capture something and segregate it within a little zone if you want to. This really has to be thought through effectively, and it's hard to do in real time.
Yeah, it absolutely is. And, I tell my clients, if you're talking to more than three or four people, you're talking to the public, right? If you're saying anything to your entire employee base, you might as well like act like you're putting it on your website, act like you're blasting it out on social media because it's going to get out. And the last thing you want is for your internal and external messaging to conflict. That is going to lead to a problem 9 times or 10 times out of 10. It's always going to end badly for you. So I wanted to walk you through a case study. This is a real matter that I've dealt with. A North American client, very large company. They had a vendor that was monitoring domain registrations for them. That was a great proactive approach. They identified 98 typo domains that were registered within 36 hours. And all of that happened in China. There was no websites coming up, no real activity. There was some MS records that were configured, so we thought maybe there was a phishing campaign coming. Really, we had no idea what was going to happen, but we knew that it was going to be bad. Like there was no legitimate reason why this kind of activity would be happening. So we acted very quickly. We filed the UDRP, and the way this whole process works, you file the UDRP, and then the form that you file with serves the registrant of the domains. Now we never know who the registrant is. The forum does know, and they serve them. But what we found was that as soon as we filed the UDRP complaint, all activity on these domains stopped. Like nothing else happened. So that was a success just in itself. And then, in short order, we did win in the UDRP process and the domains were transferred to the client. Um, then, the real kind of business problem comes up. This client had thousands of domains registered. It's a very expensive domain portfolio to maintain. So they decided to allow some of these registrations to lapse. Now the bad guys, they're continually probing and pushing and poking, and a couple of years later, the bad guys did re-register some of these domains. So the lesson here is that the monitoring does work. Paying attention to this stuff can lead to, taking quick action and really nipping this stuff in the bud before it gets out of hand. But the second lesson here is that the threats persist. The bad guys don't go away just because you stopped this one situation. They will come back and they'll keep coming back. So you really need a long-term plan on how to deal with this stuff. And now I'm going to turn it back over to you, David.
Thanks, Josh. Well, it's clear that there are a lot of technical and legalistic elements to this problem of domain spoofing, and so that sometimes leads companies to the mistaken idea that is something that can be dealt with at the lower levels or the technical points of the company. But this is actually a board level issue, as we've seen, because we're talking about your whole business and your brand. And so what boards need to do, first of all, is to understand and control your brand surface area. Now, what does that mean? So you think about an attack surface, which is where you're vulnerable from a cybersecurity standpoint. The brand surface area is all the places that your brand appears and where a malicious actor could fool someone. So that's, of course, your own domain. Also, your subdomains, which are often overlooked and unprotected, even when the top level domain is fine. You've got the lookalike domains. You also have things that marketing has done, like little microsites that might have been set up for a particular product launch or an event that you're doing. Those are vulnerable too and need to be addressed. And then there's also vendor integrations that rely on your domain. So a lot of companies might use a support desk that has their URL in it, but is actually hosted somewhere else. And you have to make sure that all of those are taken care of. You also need to make sure that the email authentication is properly enforced. That's things like SPF and DKIM. And also the human guardrails. All what we talked about here is usually a human doing something which is in human nature, like clicking on a link. And I always say links are for clicking. So we can't really be angry at someone that they clicked on a link. But there's training, there's processes, and then the escalation paths. And all of these things need to have at least the oversight of the board and senior management. So let's talk pragmatically about what can be done. Say 3 things in 30 days. So one important piece relates to the enforcement of these proper email configurations. That's SPF, DKIM, and DMARC. You want to confirm that those things are present and that they're actively enforced. The settings have to be done right. Now, how is it practical for a board to do that? I'll show you on the next slide. We have a free tool that you can use in order to make sure that everything is all set. The second thing is to verify that any payments that you're making are out of band. And Josh actually talked about this a little bit before, but this is a very important one. When you're sending money, you want to make sure it's going to the right place. And if your email is compromised, which you might need to assume, and you're communicating via email, you don't want to use that to do the confirmation. Pick up the phone and make a call. That's the best way to do it. The third thing is to schedule a tabletop exercise. Now, this is an exercise where your team can rehearse and say, gee, let's pretend this happened. What would we do? Talk it through. It's good to have done that rather than having to do this live. And this can then lead to the development of robust playbooks. So you'll have something ready to go for when the inevitable incident does occur. And I would say if you do take these 3 steps alone, you're gonna significantly reduce your risk. Now, Josh, if you go ahead and jump to the next slide where we were showing before for a second, this tool that we have. If you go to our website, adamcell.com, you can pull this out of the tools menu or just go to adamcell.com/spoofcheck, and you just need to type in the name of your domain or any domain, and including you might want to type in the domains of anybody that you're doing business with, and you can check it. So you just type in the domain and then you click the button there on the right, and you can show what happens on the next page when you check a domain of an organization that is responsible and make sure that all of their configurations are proper. In this case, princelobel.com. I will say that more than half of the organizations that we look at do have an issue, and so you won't always see that green. You may well see a red, and if you do, then there's going to be some information that you can forward along to your technical team. So this is important because a lot of times people think, well, it's unrealistic for me as a non-technical manager or board member to have any real oversight on cybersecurity, but you need to be able to do it, and this is a tool that does enable that. Very good. So that's the way to go, and I'll turn it back to you, Josh.
Sure. Thanks, David. And I do love that tool. It's a very user-friendly, super easy to use, can be quite informative and really drive some really great conversations about what organizations are doing and what they can be doing better. I really just wanted to leave with 2 issues here, or 2 points. One is that your domain service is your brand. So, every time someone thinks they're going to your site, they have you in mind and they're thinking of you. And if that's a good experience, great. And if it's a bad experience, you really need to pay attention to why that's bad. If it's bad because they're going to the wrong site, that's something you need to take control over and you need to take action on. And then secondly, preparedness is resilience. If you're ready, if you've practiced these, the tabletop exercises like David mentioned, if you take some really simple fundamental steps to get ready, you can really increase the resilience of your organization and ensure that, what could have been a big incident is a much more easily contained and manageable process. So, resilience is the name of the game. Everyone's going to get hit at some point with some form of cyber attack, with some form of privacy issue. But you want to be able to get through it. You want to be able to emerge stronger on the other side. And that only happens when you put in the effort in the front end, to be prepared and to be ready for it.
Awesome. Well, thank you, Josh and David, so much for your time and for sharing this information with us. If anyone has any questions, Josh and David's emails are here on this slide. You're welcome to reach out to them. Thank you again.